Raider Nation, today hit like a drumline at kickoff, loud, sudden, and you could feel it in your ribs. There's a quarterback twist rattling the very top of the draft. The top target is out here talking about a serious voice inside the building. We've got 3 dudes on the roster staring at a fork in the road, and yeah, head coach chatter is heating up again with a name we all recognize circling back. But the real detonation, it's that last offseason nugget that lands like a meteor. Don't go anywhere. Before we crack this open, do me a favor. Lock in with the channel and jump in the comments and tell me who you think the next head coach is going to be, because your take helps steer the whole ship like a compass in a storm. Alright, listen, this draft board just did a backflip nobody saw coming, and it splashes straight onto the Raiders because we're sitting at the very top with the #1 overall pick. When a franchise has been thirsty for a quarterback for ages, any movement in that market feels like the ground splitting under your feet. This time, the tremor came from college football, and the trigger was Dante Moore. He decided to go back to Oregon for one more season. Translation, he pulled himself off the NFL buffet for now. I saw that, and my first thought was, are you kidding me? Right this second? Because love him or hate him, more quarterback choices always rearrange the chessboard, and the second one piece disappears, the league starts sweating. With Moore out, the name that suddenly towers over this class is Fernando Mendoza. I'm not calling him a guaranteed hit because the NFL doesn't hand out guarantees like candy. But right now, he's become the most pro-ready quarterback available. And if we're being real, the rest of the class isn't striking fear into anybody. So now the Raiders are standing at a clean crossroads. Either you draft Mendoza and stop slapping duct tape on the position every year, or you start dialing phones and demand a king's ransom from a desperate team. And here's the fun part for those who live and breathe Raiders football every day. When options dry up, the #1 pick turns into a diamond in a drought. If a team sitting back there thinks it's now or never to grab their quarterback, they pay up. They pay with a high pick, future picks, a second rounder, a young player. That kind of haul can redraw 2 full years of planning like a new blueprint. You look at it and go, okay, now we can actually build something real. But there's another hunger tugging the other direction. We're all sick of watching seasons crumble because the most important spot on the field got handled like a last-minute hack job. And I can already hear the silver and black crowd splitting down the middle. Some are yelling, take the quarterback and keep it moving. Others are looking at the roster and saying, pump the brakes, we need more pieces. I understand both sides. A quarterback covers up a lot, but tossing a rookie behind a busted offensive line is basically tossing him into a blender and acting surprised when it goes bad. Nobody wants to sit through that rerun again. Bottom line, Dante Moore, without even trying, just stacked more leverage on John Spytek's desk. If some wild offer rolls in loaded with future picks and real rebuilding fuel, it's tough to ignore. And if it doesn't, cool, draft Mendoza and start carving out what this offense is supposed to be. That part, I'm into it. The #1 pick isn't just a player, it's a steering wheel for the direction of the shield. Yeah, you can wreck it, absolutely. But you can also nail it and snap the franchise into a whole new gear. And tell me in the comments, are you flipping that pick for a monster haul, or are you going quarterback without a single hesitation? I want the raw fan vote on this, no sugarcoating. But keep that in your pocket, because next up, there's a behind-the-curtain detail involving a certain minority owner, and it might weigh a ton in this whole evaluation. Now here's another layer messing with everybody's head watching this draft. The pull inside the building. This isn't just scouts with clipboards. It isn't only tape, workouts, and the combine. The conversations in those rooms are like currents. You don't see them, but they steer the boat. And when somebody in that room has lived the full NFL story, that voice lands heavier than a lead plate. The connection is obvious. Fernando Mendoza and Tom Brady. Mendoza straight up said his dream dinner guest would be Brady. And it didn't sound like some robotic media line he practiced in the mirror. He talked like it was real respect. He talked about resilience. He talked about how Brady carried himself across his career. He even brought up being born in Boston. Said he grew up with that as a reference point. That tells you something. The kid isn't just tossing words, he's flashing his wiring. Now zoom back to the Raiders. Brady's a minority owner, sure. But he's also a minority owner who knows exactly what a quarterback room needs to function like a machine. He knows routine, he knows pressure, he knows leadership, and if he's truly helping guide prospect evaluations, like people are saying, that changes what gets emphasized in the questioning. It makes different traits rise to the top. It's not only arm strength and highlight throws, it's what happens after a mistake. It's how a guy owns the huddle when the whole game feels like it's melting down. It's how he takes heat without folding into himself. I like that because everybody's exhausted from blind gambles and soft, maybe one-day projects. And Mendoza, from what he shows, wears leadership like a badge. That doesn't mean he's instantly great, but it does mean he walks in ready to grind. And if you're trying to reshape culture, that's a big deal. But there's another angle nobody wants to say out loud, so I'll say it. When a prospect openly idolizes Tom Brady, it can swing both ways. It can motivate. It can also stack pressure like bricks on a backpack. Brady's shadow is enormous. If that kid lands in Las Vegas, the comparisons will fly. In the stadium, on the radio, everywhere online, and the silver and black crowd doesn't exactly hand out patience like free samples, so the staff has to protect him too. They have to build the setting around him, build the offensive line, get the run game planted, hire a coordinator who actually teaches. Don't bring in someone who slams a playbook down and vanishes like smoke. And here's what grabs me most. If Brady is genuinely part of this process, he might be the difference between chasing raw talent and choosing someone who can actually endure the NFL. I'm not saying he's running everything solo, but he can push. He can poke holes. He can back a stance. And that could slide Mendoza even closer to the plan if that's the direction they're leaning. But the draft is only half the puzzle. Even if you land the quarterback, you still have to keep affordable, useful guys on the roster. And there are 3 names headed toward free agency that could become a migraine if Spytek plays this wrong. That's what we're stepping into next. Here's the unsexy part of the offseason that still wins you games. It's like changing the oil before the engine blows. You stare at your own roster and decide who stays, and if you blink, you end up watching that guy thrive somewhere else while you chew on regret. Raider Nation has swallowed that pill way too many times. The Raiders have 3 pending free agents who, to me, need to be sitting right on John Spytek's desk with a big red marker. And what's wild is none of these are the flashy billboard names. These are work boots. First up, Eric Stokes. He showed up with that prove-it edge like he had something to get back. And he did. He played. He stayed available, and he helped in the exact area that keeps springing leaks for this team, the secondary. If he walks, you're not just losing a body. You're losing someone who already speaks the system's language, and he already took the bruises doing it. Next is Dylan Parham. That's the kind of player you don't fully appreciate until the chair is empty. He's just there, eats snaps, starts games, does the grimy stuff, and when you're trying to rebuild an offensive line, you can't treat linemen like poker chips you shuffle every hand. Line play is chemistry, trust, repetition. It's a band that has to rehearse. If you're serious about protecting a young quarterback, keeping a guy like that starts to feel close to mandatory. And the third name is Daniel Carlson. Kicker is a savage job. When you hit, nobody throws you flowers. When you miss, you're the villain of the week. But the reality is simple. Dependable kickers don't just drop out of the clouds. Carlson has highs and lows, sure, but he's still steadier than most of the chaos you see across the league. If the number makes sense, I'd rather keep him than spin the wheel and hope. And then Spytek said something that stuck because he admitted it stung, seeing players leave and then perform elsewhere. To me, that's a scar that teaches. But a lesson without action is just noise. You can't say you won't let good players walk, then lose useful pieces because negotiations got sloppy. And I see the fan base split again. Some want the whole thing ripped down to the studs. Others want to keep what actually works and add fresh blood. I'm somewhere in the middle. Rebuilding isn't lighting the whole house on fire. It's deciding with a steady hand who stays and who goes. So if you agree or disagree, hit the comments and tell me which of these 3 you'd prioritize. First, second, third. Those choices tell you where the team's headed, and keep it right here because the next topic is about leadership at the very top. And a name we all know is floating around the biggest seat in the building again. The second you say head coach, the room temperature jumps like someone cranked the heater. Because it's not just X's and O's, it's culture. It's who plays. It's keeping the locker room from splintering when a season starts sliding downhill. And after a 3-14 year, nobody has the stomach for another swing that turns into dust. The name showing up again is Robert Saleh. I know, some folks tense up because of how it went with the Jets. But others push back and say, let's be real, that place has been a circus for years. What matters is this. Saleh is respected around the league, especially for what he brings defensively. And now he's tied into that coaching ecosystem everybody loves to copy, the tree that comes from Shanahan and McVay. And that points to one thing. He's likely got the connections and the imagination to build a legit offensive staff. And that is exactly what the Raiders need. Sure, the defense could level up with him. But if you're really going all in on a young quarterback, you cannot hire a head coach without a clear offensive roadmap. You can't bring someone in and say, we'll figure out the coordinator later. We've watched that story already. It always ends the same. An offense stuck in mud, a quarterback not developing, the silver and black crowd going nuclear, and there's another piece that changes the vibe, the number one pick. That makes this job way more attractive. This isn't only cleaning up a mess, it's getting to pick the face of the franchise. A lot of NFL people want that kind of chance. So Spytek has to be surgical here. I'll say it straight, I like Saleh's energy, I like his presence, I like his intensity, but I don't want a coach who only comes with one side of the toolbox. I want the full package, a defense with an identity and an offense with a clear lane to follow. If he shows up with a strong offensive coordinator who actually knows how to develop a young quarterback, everything changes. And I can already picture the stands if that name gets confirmed. Some people losing their minds in a good way, some furious, some waiting for that first press conference to see if he's got real command. That's Raiders football. Nobody buys talk without proof. And now we hit the weightiest part of all this, because none of it matters if the offseason gets handled like it's all half steps. That's where the toughest message involving Tom Brady and John Spytek comes in. Here's what's eating at me like sand in a shoe right now. Watching the Raiders have cap space and move like they're just tossing bandages on bullet holes. That can't be the plan anymore. The message floating around is simple. Tom Brady and John Spytek have to change how they operate, and not just for show. Last year there was money, there was opportunity, and the approach was to bring in a bunch of guys trying to bounce back. Some of them helped, but helped doesn't lift a 3-14 team. Helped doesn't give you a new identity. And honestly, I'm tired of seasons that start with hope and then feel like we're just trying to stay alive by October. What the front office has to do now is spend like they mean it with purpose and guts. Bring in players who are ready right now, players who walk in as starters and nobody argues, players who make the guy next to them better just by showing up, because you can sign 5 fine players and stay a fine team. Or you can land 2 or 3 actual difference makers and raise the entire standard. And there's one target that should be flashing like a neon sign on the strip: the offensive line. Protection is the base layer. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is. If the pocket turns into a collapsing tent, it's over. The idea out there is the Raiders are 1 or 2 players away from fixing the starting 5, so go do it. That's what free agency is for. The draft can handle depth later. I also get why people bring up the young talent on offense. Brock Bowers and Ashton Jeanty are exciting, but young talent without structure is like fireworks with no runway. Pretty, then gone. And I'm not here to collect maybe someday. If Brady is really putting his weight into the process, cool. Then put that weight behind protection, physicality, and identity too. That's how you build a team that doesn't crumble the moment it gets punched. And another thing matters. Hiring the right coach is only the first step. That coach needs to look at the roster and feel like the front office is all in with him. That's where gutting the roster with intelligence comes in. Cut what doesn't work, keep what does. Hit the market without being scared to pay for players who actually raise the bar. In the end, this offseason is going to stamp who the Raiders want to be. Patchwork forever, or a team willing to build it the hard way. And when you combine the number 1 pick, new leadership, and available money, the pressure stacks up like weights on a barbell. So breathe for a second, because everything we covered today funnels into one bigger question about identity and what this shield is going to demand next. Let me put it like this. This offseason is the lie detector test. Either the Raiders learned something or they just learned new words. Dante Moore's choice shook the board and made the number 1 pick even heavier. Fernando Mendoza became the clearest draft target. And with Tom Brady close by, the heat to nail that decision only rises. At the same time, the roster can't just leak talent. Eric Stokes, Dylan Parham, and Daniel Carlson are the kind of pieces you keep so you're not creating fresh problems tomorrow. Then there's the head coach spot. If Robert Saleh is the lane, he better roll in with a ready-made offensive plan. Without that, you're just dragging the same problem to a different room. And above everything, Brady and John Spytek have to quit stacking okay players like they're collectibles. The offensive line has to be the priority. The signings need to hit with force. They need players who swing games, because nobody can stand watching the shield fade into background noise anymore. Drop your take in the comments. What's your move with the number 1 pick, and what's your top free agency priority? This space belongs to everyone who lives and breathes Raiders football.